that I can borrow.
I do.
I just looked in my purse. I have everything. Everything. Yeah, last night.
Really cool.
Yeah. It's too early.
Our judgment. Location at the Burkhardt House.
Oh, good. Glad. Glad. Should be. I'm gonna go run back on the phone.
Is Donovan, our intern, joining us remotely or just watching on YouTube, I guess? Okay, that's fine.
We're waiting until then.
Yeah, I think just for the YouTube thing to start flowing.
It's live right now on
It's
YouTube.
going,
so-
yes.
Oh, it is. Oh,
Yeah.
we're good. So we're good. We're live on YouTube.
Everybody,
Excellent.
thank you. Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so let's begin the meeting. Megan, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Judge. The Honorable Sharon Keller.
Here.
Mr. Alex Glennon.
Here.
Honorable Valerie Covey. The Honorable Brandon Creighton. The Honorable Richard Evans.
Here.
Mr. Gonzalo Rios.
Here.
The Honorable Nathan Heck. The Honorable Missy Maderi. The Honorable Joe Moody. The Honorable Reggie Smith. The Honorable Sherry Raddick.
Here.
The Honorable Vivian Torres. The Honorable John Whitmire. Judge, we have quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from December 1st, 2022?
Oh, move.
There's a second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. I want to welcome our new board member. The Texas Fair Defense Act lays out TIDC's board composition, and in part it states that the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee will serve on TIDC's board. Representative Nicole Collier recently tenure as chair of the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, and we'd like to thank her for her service in that, as well as her service on TIDC's board and Policies and Standards Committee. Representative Joe Moody was recently appointed as the new chair of House Criminal Jurisprudence, and by virtue of that role, will also serve on our board. This is not Chair Moody's first time on our board. Prior to Representative Collier's tenure as chair, Representative Moody served as chair of Criminal Jurisprudence and served on the board of criminal and served on this board. Chair Moody is a private defense attorney and former prosecutor from El Paso, and he brings a good deal of experience and wisdom with him to TIDC. So I'd like to welcome Chairman Moody back to the board. We're excited that you could join us. And that is all I had for his comments. So Jeff, your report, please.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, everyone. If you turn to page 6 of your meeting book with the director's report, bless you. I have just a few updates. The first one's on Operation Lone Star. When we look at the case numbers, overall, the case numbers are steady. However, if you break it down, you would see that misdemeanor arrests are declining steadily, while felony arrests have increased steadily. You may remember from one of our previous meetings that when Operation Lone Star started, felony arrests were less than 10% of the overall arrest numbers for Operation Lone Star. And today, felonies comprise over 50% of overall arrests for Operation Lone Star. So those have increased considerably. That's posed challenges. We've actually been fortunate in recent months when it comes to recruiting attorneys for misdemeanor cases. But of course, for felony cases, it requires recruiting more experienced attorneys. And so that has posed some challenges. So we are certainly working toward that. The legislature did include some Operation Lone Star funding for next biennium in TIDC's base budget. And I'll talk more a little bit about our budget in just a moment. But let me pause there and to see if there are any questions about Operation Lone Star. Moving on to the legislature, I'll speak for just a little bit about our budget and where we stand on that, and then I'll hand it over to Wesley to talk about some of the bills. You may remember that we had 4 requests when it came to our legislative appropriation request. The first exceptional item was $11.4 million in general revenue to maintain basic public defense funding. Essentially, the majority of our budget is reliant on court costs, which are general revenue dedicated. Those court costs the past several years have declined considerably. although they're starting to rise back up a little bit. According to our estimates and working with OCA on this, we would see an $11.4 million gap in our budget compared to the current biennium if we didn't have any funds to fill that gap. When I wrote this, we had the House budget in hand, but we did not yet have the Senate budget. Just in the past few days, we received the Senate budget, so I can give an update on both. On that $11.4 million request, that is in the House budget. It is not currently in the Senate budget. One big asterisk to that is that even in the House budget, they were saying that basically that would be filled with additional GRD. Based on the comptroller's numbers, they now believe that there will be enough GRD to fill that gap. We're still a little bit concerned on the staff side, and so is OCA, that there would be enough GRD to fill that gap. So we are meeting with LBB tomorrow in order to try to figure out that disconnect. The second request was $70 million in general revenue to build and expand public defender offices, primarily but not exclusively aimed at rural defenders. That $70 million request is for general revenue. The House version of the bill has $20 million in general revenue. The Senate right now has $0 in general revenue for that. So there is a gap between the House and the Senate versions. The third request was 6 additional staff for TIDC. Many of those staff would be focused on grant processing and monitoring. I'm happy to say that both the House version and the Senate version have those 6 additional staff. And the last request was for additional funds for Operation Lone Star. This is really to address that rise in felonies that we've seen in Operation Lone Star. And the request was an additional $10 million a year or $20 million for the biennium. That is in the House version. It is not in the Senate version. But I believe it was in Article 11 for the Senate version, and I've been told there is some chance that that may be taken out of Article 11 and included in the final bill. So we'll keep you posted on that. So overall, what we're seeing essentially is a roughly $40 million gap between the House and Senate versions. Essentially, what will happen in the coming weeks is that the House and Senate will meet in conference committee, hash out those differences, and then ultimately have a budget bill. So we'll keep you posted on all that. I'm happy to take any questions on the budget. That's a lot of moving pieces. But the last couple of updates I had real quick were I'm really happy. We've been very fortunate in hiring staff, and the caliber of person we've been able to hire in past years has been very high, and these 2 new folks are no exception. I wanted to welcome Dr. Sarah Gamble, who is our first research director here at TIDC. Dr. Gamble was previously with SMU's Thiessen Center and spent, I guess, the past year and a half or so focused on TIDC data, actually, and analyzing that. So she's not new to TIDC data. I also want to welcome Eric Schneider, who is our newest grants specialist. And we're very happy to have the capacity on the grants team because everyone stays very busy. Finally, we're going to have an update on the data website, and then I'll jump back to the, actually, if it's okay, maybe we jump back and do the bills and then go to the data website. So Wesley, you mind talk about the bills?
So there's a bill update on page 8, and the first 11 in this chart are the 10 proposals adopted by the TIDC board back in August. And number 1 is the omnibus bill that encompasses all 10 of those. So Representative Reggie Smith, as within the board, filed House Bill 1528 to include all the bills. It was heard 2 weeks ago in committee. And so we're anticipating that the version of that with some minor tweaks in the committee substitute is going to be coming back to the committee next week. And so we're hopeful that we'll get voted out and get moving. The legislative committees just started hearing bills about 3 weeks ago. So all the bills are filed, the bill deadline has passed. And so that one is the big one for the TIDC proposals. Turning to the next page, there are a handful of the proposals that are in standalone bills. Item number 8, this is been pending 3 sessions and it was also heard, and actually since this meeting was put together, it was actually voted out of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee on Tuesday. Scott served as a resource witness when that bill was heard. He also served as a resource witness on the omnibus bill 2 weeks ago when it was heard. And then item number 11, which is to add a couple of members to the TIDC governing board, that was heard as well 2 weeks ago. Jeff served as a resource witness on that. It's been voted out, and in fact, the committee report has been put forward and filed. So it's getting close to being eligible for consideration. But House just began hearing bills on the floor, so we're kind of at the front end of that crazy process the next 10 weeks or so. And then other bills of interest on page 10. The first one is the Texas Judicial Council recommendations to establish a family protection program within TIDC. That's been filed by Senator Zaffarini and Senator Sparks. It's now been referred to the State Affairs Committee in the Senate, but not yet heard. And then the next two were also recently heard in House Criminal Jurisprudence. One would require TIDC to establish maximum attorney caseload standards. It's a bill that Representative Collier filed last session as well. And then number three would effectively create a new independent office for the State Council for Offenders instead of being under the Texas Board of Criminal Justice as it is currently. And that was also heard back on March 14th. And that's it. I mean, there are a couple of other bills of interest, perhaps. Number 5 is a bill also by Representative Smith and Senator Sparks, two versions of it to expand student loan repayment programs to rural public defenders and private assigned counsel. There's a similar provision in code right now for prosecutors in rural Texas, but it's not been funded before. This would expand the program to include public defenders as well, up to population of 100,000 for the counties. Obviously, if it was funded, could have a pretty significant impact. That's it for the bills. That's usually questions.
Judge, the very last item I had on my director's report was the data website update. However, the next agenda item I see is actually a research report from Dr. Gamble. So it's okay, I might just hand it over to her and just let her run with that if that's all right.
If you look at the same agenda item,
Yeah, I'm looking at for number 6. Oh, yeah, the new website update.
oh, I thought you said that this came.
Yeah, so I was going to skip over this if that's
Okay,
D
sure.
and just hand it over to Dr.
Okay.
Gamble. If that's okay. Dr. Gamble.
Good morning. I am Dr. Sarah Deming. I am one of the newest folks on staff. I came from SMU, the Houston Criminal Justice Reform Center House in SMU, where Jeff had already mentioned. One of my focuses was looking at the Texas criminal legal system, heavily using TIDC. So that might be why I'm here. But right now, my primary focus is overhauling the data website. We're doing this in coordination with our research partners at Texas A&M, PPRI, or Public Policy Research Institute. And so, many of you will know that TIDC has one of the leading data websites on indigent defense in the nation, but it's decades old. And so we're looking to kind of address several issues, one of which is making it easier for judges, auditors, attorneys to input data, that they do that on a regular basis. Another is making it easier for researchers, the media, the public to read and analyze data, so get it out and consume it easier. And then, one of our heaviest users of the data website is our staff. And so working towards making the data relatable and making connections in meaningful ways so that they're able to analyze and create reports more efficiently. So right now we're in the discovery phase. We're really taking the time to understand how people are using the data. We're doing a lot of this through survey methodology. Many of you in this room actually will be receiving a survey from us just to get your input on how you think things are going. We will be interacting with several different stakeholders, and we'll wrap up that phase of discovery by the end of May. And then after that, we will work towards the designing and eventually the programming of this new website. I've included a brief write-up. It's on page 11. So please let me know if you have any questions. But I'm excited to be on board with you guys at TIDC. So thanks for having me. That completes my report. Welcome.
All right. Next is the expense investigation report.
Scott, I think we have people on
Yes.
Zoom.
Benita Embry with the RTI International will be presenting the results of the investigator research that they've been doing over the last year and a half. Before she started, I did want to, there's some folks that I wanted to thank for being part of the process. I've spent a lot of time with us. Eldon Whitworth, who's an investigator with the Lubbock Private Defender Office. He's here as well today. He'll be available for the Q&A section after Vanita. Rachel Etheridge, who's an attorney and mitigation specialist with the Regional Public Defender Office for capital cases, also was very helpful and attended a lot of our meetings. And Kelly Childress, the chief defender for the El Paso Public Defender Office as well.
Would you mind just saying a word or two about how we got here, what this, so I think it's been a long time since the board has talked about just what this research is about.
Yeah, I think that's slide one actually of the presentation. But real quick, basically there was a grant application, grant opportunity for technical assistance from the Bureau of Justice Assistance regarding effectively indigent defense and problems that may exist in states and ways in which that can be improved. Around that time, we were noticing that a lot of counties did not have any expenditures for investigators. And so we went to them for technical assistance, and this research came out of that technical assistance. So Vanita, I think you're up.
Great. I'll go ahead and jump in. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I am Dr. Vanita Embry, and as Scott mentioned, I'm with RTI International, which is a research organization based out of Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. And we are one of the grant partners for the Strengthening the Six Justice for All Technical Assistance Grant. So I'll be presenting high-level findings of an exploratory study evaluating investigator use by Defense Counsel in Texas. So for sake of time, I'll be presenting a limited background review of the literature, but essentially we want to make clear that research has found that courtroom success is linked to the availability of investigators. Yet in Texas, 54% of jurisdictions reported $0 defense investigator expenditures in fiscal year 2020. These were mostly in small and rural counties. And in 2021, as Scott mentioned, TIDC reached out to the GFA team to examine the issue that could inform potential policy and practice changes as well as trainings. So the JFA team is comprised of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and RTI with support from our other grant partner, the National Center for State Courts. And we conducted an investigator survey, a defense attorney survey, and interviews with judges to learn about investigator utilization and potential gaps in practice. The Texas team included the members of TIDC as well as an advisory group. So this is a brief snapshot of each of the data collection I just mentioned, which were a mix of convenience and purposive sampling. So we heard from 171 investigators that work in 131 unique Texas counties. We heard from 380 public defense attorneys across 205 counties to understand how they use investigators, their perceptions for using, thoughts about court processes, and how easy it is to access an investigator. And lastly, we spoke to several judges in zero or low dollar investigator expenditure counties. We wanted to know things as local practices for requesting an investigator, as well as their opinions about their approval process. So now I'll just go ahead from these surveys and interviews, we identified some knowledge and practice gaps and develop recommendations. So in the remaining slides, I'll present a few of the key findings that were used to help inform these recommendations. So one of the findings that stood out the most was that investigators are underutilized in juvenile and misdemeanor cases. Among responses, only 34% of those who accepted juvenile appointed cases used an investigator at all in the last 5 years. And those that did use them, most use an investigator less than 10% of the time. Utilization was slightly higher for misdemeanor cases, but still only half of attorneys who accepted misdemeanor cases used an investigator at all in the past 5 years, and most that did use an investigator only used them rarely.
Can I just interject real quick, and just for board members, to let them know that I think we're on page 16, moving to page, page 16 of the meeting book. I think, is that right?
Now, well, Vanita, did you change things up a little bit before, since submitting the slides?
Yes, I apologize. I had just switched a couple slides. So it's the same information presented, it's just in a different order. I apologize if that's what was confusing. Should I continue?
We're on 15 now.
So, however, we did see that attorneys could benefit from an investigator, though not in a majority. When asked about experienced benefits of using an investigator, the most popular benefit, which 42% of attorneys stated, was that investigators discovered or reviewed critical witness, interviews, or evidence. Another fifth of respondents said that investigator use led to their client being found not guilty or other charges were dismissed. And then also other attorneys found that the investigators help with more other favorable outcomes. These points with other survey data suggested that attorneys could see the value, but there's still the question of why the low use. We found that surveyed attorneys need more training to understand how to use investigators. Even more than half of the investigators themselves said that there was not adequate trainings or mentorship for their profession, and that only 14% of surveyed attorneys felt that there was adequate training for lawyers in Texas on how to properly use investigators. So further, we wanted to further understand the general impact, or at least the correlation, of having relatively easy access to investigators. So as we see in this table, defense attorneys with investigators on staff used investigators majority of the time across these three case types. Defense attorneys without investigators on staff did not report using them as frequently. And of significance are the differences in juvenile cases and in misdemeanor cases. This begins to suggest that just having an investigator easily available is related to frequent utilization. So these and other findings led to two recommendations that are ultimately related to increasing and investing in investigator-related trainings to promote expanded and early use. Recommendation 1 is to take actions to promote early access to investigator and increase use in juvenile and misdemeanor cases. The second recommendation is to provide regular training for investigators, defense attorneys, member of the judiciary, and the community on the role of the importance of investigators. For sake of time, we don't present a lot of the quotes that we obtained from the surveys and from the judges' interviews, but we did want to include this one that from a defense attorney that highlighted that a defense attorney has to give good instructions to the investigator, and that this is because the counsel understands what evidence is needed to prove or disprove the case. And so young attorneys really they should be giving classes and trainings on how to properly use an investigator. So just moving ahead, a separate finding that came from our research was that we still don't really understand the true nature of the investigator deserts. So as we know, the 2020 TIDC report found that 138 of the 254 counties reported $0 investigation. However, during our data collections, we identified that some of these $0 counties actually reported having an investigator, or they had used an investigator, and that some of these inconsistencies might be due to different ways that the utilization or payments, different funds they're coming out of, or how they're recording this. So in order to really understand the use of investigators, and good and transparent data are needed. Without these data, we won't know the capacity of jurisdictions for investigators or the root cause of access to investigators. So as such, we have two recommendations. One is to improve the data collection and ensure that the data are transparent and accessible for all. The second recommendation is to identify areas of the investigator deserts and to act to promote greater access to investigators in these regions. And this is just also collecting more information about, when are grants approved, the frequency of use by case and type. Similarly, there was a lack of infrastructure to identify the best investigator for the case. This was further challenged by current reporting data only requiring aggregate expenditures for the past year. This prevents any determination of whether a county is spending a lot of money on a handful of large, serious, complex cases or in a minimum amount in virtually all other cases. It is also unknown the rate at which criminal defense attorneys requests for investigators are being made, granted, and denied. There is also no investigator listing or registry for attorneys to draw from. As such, attorneys may not be using best practices for identifying investigators. The interviews we conducted or interviews identified that investigators are frequently working with the same attorneys and that these referrals are often through word of mouth. Additionally, many believe that picking a licensed investigator is the most important criteria. However, this may not be the most efficient method for determining who is appropriate for a case when they're available or willing to take court appointments. So what can be done to better identify qualified investigators? DPS may have the best understanding of the list of licensed investigators, but are typically not in the business of advertising or helping attorneys find investigators, which leads us to our next set of recommendations. So we have two recommendations. One is to create and maintain a registry of investigators to support greater access to defense lawyers. TIDC can support and oversee this list. Investigators can register and provide areas of expertise and skills to better match case needs. The second recommendation is to pool resources and develop hubs for defense attorneys' access to investigators. This is to ensure both access to investigators, but also a way to ensure there is support for knowing how to access and use defense investigators, which are further complemented by periodic trainings mentioned previously. And our last finding and recommendations come from the perception that the process of judiciary approving investigator requests can negatively impact access to investigators. From the judges' interviews, those interviewed attributed the consideration of approving investigators and funding to balancing the need to be a good steward of the county's fund with the need to provide a robust defense. Judicial burden is associated with evaluating and approving requests can reduce access to investigators. This can cause delay in approvals for investigators, delay in compensation, and then also attorneys may sometimes fear asking, worrying that they will irritate the judge or will negatively impact their case. So requiring defense to provide case-specific information when requesting an investigator or seeking payment can have the chilling effect, as I mentioned. So defense may forego an investigator if they feel that in the process of requesting an investigator, they have to reveal confidential and sensitive details of their case. They're also concerned that if the investigation doesn't actually lead to anything, that this can devalue the defense and defendant. And 47% of defense attorneys agree that they're more likely to get an investigator request approved by some judges than others, which suggests a high amount of discretion and different thresholds of approvals by different judges. And lastly, it's important to note that public defender offices and MAC offices typically bypass the court approval and reimbursement process. They have their own investigators and access to pool of investigators. They control their own budget and use. And this is correlated with an increased use of investigators, particularly in misdemeanors and juvenile cases. So as our last result recommendation we're presenting, we recommended to shift the review and approval of requests to defense investigators and payment for investigator services from the judiciary to public defense service providers. And this is just a brief overview of our conclusions. Many of these things I've outlined And the main things are policy recommendations outlined in this report, in this presentation, provide ways to help increase investigator uses in the state. And we see in the last line, further research is needed to dive deeper into these findings and further confirm these findings among a wider and more representative sample of Texas investigators and defense attorneys. And this is, I'll leave up the list of recommendations and just jump to the last slide, that if you do have any questions about this report, I know you all have the larger draft report, you're welcome to contact us, but I'll just go and leave it on this recommendations recap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting and great to have that information. Next, moving on. Does anybody have any questions about the investigator report?
Okay, Judge, would you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah.
Dr. Ember, can you hear me? This is Jeff Burkhart.
Yes.
Okay, I had a question. So it sounds like one of the biggest issues is in rural areas. One of the big focus areas for TIDC in recent years has been building rural regional defender offices that include investigators. Did you all happen to have a chance, and if you didn't, it's okay, maybe outside the scope, but did you have a chance to look at those areas where we've built rural regional public defender offices that include investigators and look at usage, or is that a little bit more in the weeds than kind of what y'all were looking at?
I'm not sure we looked specifically in those areas. We had a broad convenient sample. I think maybe an area where we could look if there's any specific counties of looking and seeing if there are some differences, some crosstabs that we can run to see if there's those specific counties and if we can inform the report in that way. Scott or Monica from NACL, I don't know if there was other thoughts you had about that.
No, I mean, we talked a bit like towards the end of the research about some of those more in the weed kind of questions, looking at specific counties, how were they impacted by the introduction of a MAC or a new public defender office, what was usage of investigators like, before those offices existed versus after, or a pre and a post, or maybe try to do some sort of comparison between counties that are similar. But yeah, for this research, I think all of that was a little beyond their time and capacity at this point, but I think those are good potential research areas we could look at in the future.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Let's move on to the reporting. Judge Madera.
All right, Judge Madera, aka Edwin.
Thank you, Judge. So I'm going to kick over the first item, report on the Indigent Defense Expenditure Report summary to Joel, who prepared a summary that's on page 35.
Yes, if you could turn to page 35. As of March 18th, we had closed out most of the counties in our Indigent Defense Expenditure Report. There were still a couple outstanding, but at that time there were $337.4 million in Indigent Defense expenditures. This was a little bit higher than we forecasted in December. In December, we expected between $342 and $347 million spent, and this excludes Operation Lone Star. If we wanted to categorize these expenses, we could say about $236 million were for assigned counsel and contract counsel cases. As is typical, more than 90% of these expenses were for attorney fees. We also had about $100 million that could be attributed to public defender expenses, and these included counties hosting public defender offices, counties paying to be part of a regional public defender office, and the state's support of the capital murder public defender office. We had about $5.5 million spent on counties providing managed assigned counsel services, and we had an additional $3.5 million spent by counties for administrative costs. Turning to page 36, I have a graph that shows historical spending. Between 2001 and 2019, spending on indigent defense services has gone up very consistently, but there was a drop during COVID, and happened because we realized many of our expenses when a case is disposed and an attorney is paid for it. However, during COVID, there were many fewer cases disposed. So what happened is there was like a little bit of a a block in the pipeline, and that pipeline is now coming out this year. So we had a big jump in spending. We don't know if all of those COVID cases are through the pipeline, and so we may see this to continue into next year, or that is this year. Changing the topic slightly to the next page, going on to appointment rates. Since the Fair Defense Act is coming to being, we've seen a jump in appointment rates. The graph has two lines. The top line shows felony appointment rates, and the bottom shows misdemeanor appointment rates. It's gone up fairly consistently over the first few years, and then it may have leveled off a little bit. The FY22 numbers, the far right number, is probably a little bit understated. That's because we were trying to exclude Operation Lone Star cases. When we look at appointment rates, we measure it by cases paid, and we could exclude those Operation Lone Star cases paid, but that's divided by the total cases disposed. And clerks don't differentiate Operation Lone Star cases when they report to OCA. And so it includes all of those cases. So the statewide appointment rates for both felony and misdemeanor cases is likely at least a little bit higher. And then continuing on to page 38. Since 2011, we've made estimates of the number of pro se misdemeanor cases. These are cases in which defendants do not have counsel. We've been able to do this since 2011 because at that time, OCA began collecting data on the number of retained cases. And at first, after we've been able to make this estimate, we saw a large drop in the number of cases going without counsel. More recently, it is somewhat leveled off, but as we had with appointment rates, this number is now a little bit overstated. In FY22, the number or the percent of cases going without counsel is likely a little bit lower than the 20% listed. I don't know exactly how much. I think the one thing that we can really glean from these totals is that in small and medium-sized counties, we've seen a dramatic drop in the number of people going without counsel, and that trend is in FY22. If there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I will turn this over to Crystal, who will talk about child protection service.
I just have a quick question. Why do you think that is? In the United States? Why do you think that less people are doing it? I mean, is it progressive DAs that are kind of saying, hey, you guys need to have counsel, or what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think that there's just maybe been a little bit more of a light shining on what's required, and then we're looking at counties and giving a report. If we go through a review of case sample and we see that there's some requests for counsel that weren't ruled upon and the person pled without counsel, we'll make a finding to the county. And so I think generally we're trying to get the message out that people have the ability to request counsel, and if they request counsel, you have to rule on this. We give trainings as well. So I think most counties are much more aware of the
Shining the light on it and showing the need.
I'm sorry.
I think Joel's saying that they get credit for it, and I think that's happening.
Part of that, and this is, I mean, to Joel's credit and to Scott's credit and others, that the uncounseled rates in urban areas actually aren't that high. In mid-sized areas, it gets a little bit higher, but really what's driving uncounseled dependence is rural areas. It's not out yet, but SMU has a study that's going to be coming out, I think, in the next year or so, showing that as we've built public defender offices, actually, that the number of uncounseled dependents goes down, that people are actually getting attorneys. And when we're talking about these folks, these are folks who neither retain nor are appointed counsel. They just kind of slip through the cracks in different ways. And I think it's it's definitely a positive trend.
Good morning, everybody. So this year we had our second round of reporting for CPS expenditures. Those will all be back on November 1st. As of the writing of this report back on March 20th, we had 238 counties reporting expenditures and 231 counties reporting appointments. And that continues to seem about right based on the numbers of counties that have children who that are in the custody of DSPS. We did have some changes this year to reporting. The very first year of reporting last year, we requested only total dollar amounts spent and total appointments. This year, we did change it up a bit on the counties, and we asked that appointments and expenditures be broken up into categories that are on the tables on page 39. And these are custodial parents, non-custodial parents, non-parent conservators, children, adult appeal, and children appeal. And I think it's to be expected when we're doing new things with many, many counties. It's not going to be perfect immediately. We did have 43 counties reporting some difficulty in breaking the numbers up into the different categories. Not so bad, I think, with all the counties we have, and we are working with them so that with each reporting year, I think we're going to get better and better. So this last year, the total dollar amount spent on representation of kids and parents came out to just over $61 million. This is a slight drop from fiscal year 21. It's about a $4.7 million drop. I will note that the numbers of children in the custody of DFPS, the numbers of children removed, and the numbers of children served through something called family preservation cases, which sometimes can be in court, have all gone down. They went down in fiscal year 22. So the drop in spending does make sense depending on those different numbers. And then you can see the totals of the broken down categories on page 39 as far as numbers spent. That's all I have unless anyone has questions.
Great information.
Now on page 40, we've done our reports, and Sharon will give us an overview of budget status.
Morning, everyone. So on page 40, we showed, this sheet shows our fund and obligations for our prior years, FY 21 and also FY 22. As you can see, for FY 21, we have 6.4 million cash and fund and obligations. We are showing 63 million, and then below that you see the listing of the obligations that we have. So right now, just unobligated cash in that fund balance is $52,000. Some are changed. And then for FY 22, you see we have 4.1 million cash and fund, and then obligations of 3.4 million. So leave about 750 that is remaining cash. And then also this time I included at the bottom for FY 22 the coronavirus relief funds from Senate Bill 8, which is also known as the ARPA funding. We TIDC received 13.9 million for this. I'm sorry. And anyway, so we have awarded out 13.8 million in awards for this, and so there's $104,000 left on the table that we do anticipate spending. They just have not been awarded at this time.
Sharon, if I could just add quickly that we have a little more in pending obligations from the previous budget years this year, because as you'll recall, we were doing our very best to obligate funds before they went away. And so a lot of the pending amounts that were part of our previous budget year appropriations are funding programs that were getting implemented in the current year. So we're kind of using some accounting methods to bridge the gap between biennia to make sure that we made full use of our resources. So that's part of the explanation for why we have so much active or rather pending obligations in our previous budget years. I'll also say that residual amount of the ARPA funding, that 104,000, the board approved a number of grants that put most of the ARPA funds out into the field, but we do anticipate that some unanticipated things and some of these programs are going to pop up, and we're sure that money will be obligated before those programs expire. Thanks, Sharon.
Sharon, I have a quick question for you. So in regards to the ARPA funding, and I know I get this from a lot of my counties in the 5th region that ask this question. Do we have any word on whether or not, I know that we're supposed to spend it by a certain time period, correct? But we're hearing rumors that if it's already obligated, that you can continue to spend, or that they might push it back. Do you all know anything about that to let us know? Anybody? I mean, I'm Sharon or anyone.
I've heard a little bit. I don't know if you want to chime in, Edwin, but
Yeah, well, I know that the Texas legislature in its supplemental budget bill provided UB unexpended balance authority to allow us to continue to access those funds after the end of this biennium. So that was pretty much predicted because of when these funds were first kind of made available. Right now, the period of performance, meaning when the work has to be done, that's going to take us through the end of calendar year 2024. However, so that's the hard information we have. I have heard that there are considerations about potentially providing additional time to use up those resources if they haven't been fully depleted by the end of calendar year 2024. But to my knowledge, no formal action or decision has been taken. So we're hopeful that some of those, that we'll have a little more flexibility as we get toward the end of that period. But so far, it hasn't been formalized.
And on page 41, we have our comparison of revenue flow. As you see, I'm showing FY 21, 22, and FY 23. And if you go to the middle of the chart, in the middle of the page where it's showing revenue finds from September through February, as you can see for FY 23, so far we have collected $15.6 million. So we are up from FY 22 and considerably up from FY 23, which we, know dealing with COVID, so things were coming in slow, so everything was closed down. And then if you look over to the left again, you see our juror pay. And so if you notice the last two fiscal years, FY 21, we were supposed to receive $384,000, and that has not been received yet, nor have we received any funding from FY 22. So, just so you know, that's still up in the air. We're still don't know exactly what is the issue with it and why we have not received funds. Well, I'm thinking because they have not received them, because as the bill rolled, it was like anything over that they received over 10 million would come to us. So looking at that, maybe the reason why we haven't received anything, but other than that, we can't seem to get any information.
And it seems like as Sharon mentioned, while the court cost collections have recovered from COVID, they're still not at a level that would allow us to avoid basically a de facto cut in our ability to fund county programs, which is part of what our request was to supplement our budget to keep us even. And then on top of that, hopefully give us some additional resources. So a lot of this budget challenge that we're facing is driven by hitting a wall with our collections. Particularly with juror pay, but also just generally that they're just not they used to be.
And then on page 42, we have our budget revenue expenditure report for FY 23. And if you would look over to the far right, it will show you the funds that we have that have been received so far. We have 15.6 million, of course, that we said for Fund 5073. We have 15.7 million, which is for OLS, Operation Lone Star. So right now we have $31.4 million in our fund for FY 23. And if you see the expenditures that we have done so far, we've only expended 7.1 million. So right now they're showing cash in the bank right now of 24.2 million. We will be getting our formula grants here in the next few weeks. So this will help take care of some of those expenditures, because we haven't done any formula grants. We have had some of our other improvement grants. And then of course we've had money spent for Operation Lone Star. And that concludes my report. Is there any questions? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. If there are no other questions, on page 43, Doriana will give us an update on our formula grant program special conditions. Doriana?
Thank you, Evan. I will give a brief update on our special conditions. As a reminder, when formula grants are awarded, we put special conditions on counties that are not in compliance with plan reporting and grant requirements. I am so delighted to report that all counties have completed their indigent defense plans. All counties have submitted their IDR reports. Only 2 counties owe us formula grant resolutions, and I've been in contact with both Clayburgh and Charles County. And 74 counties owe us OCA court activity reports. However, we sent out one reminder already last quarter, and OCA staff and CIDC staff are in contact with you. Is there anything interesting? Shannon?
Thanks, Dorian.
That's great. That's, I think, ahead of where we've been in the past around this time.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's really good.
That's, Dorian has been doing a great job with follow-up on a lot of those items that we can control. They're really the biggest challenge we have on formula grant holds is county clerks who are county and district clerks who are behind in filing their required court activity reports. And we just have to coordinate with OCA on follow-up for that. And thanks, Dorian. On page 44, we're getting to the section where we have several grant modification requests for your consideration. On page 44, the first one is from Denton County. And this is for modification to an indigent defense coordinator team that the board granted for Denton beginning last year. So apparently there was some confusion in the county, particularly I think in the auditor's office, where there was some kind of staff turnover about properly budgeting for fringe benefit costs for these. I believe there are 3 or 4 employees in this program. Since they have had the grant, they've provided detail to us that shows that they under budgeted for fringe benefit costs. These are all the costs associated with employment besides salary. So health insurance, workers' comp, all those kinds of payroll taxes, all those kinds of corollary expenses related to employment. So they have provided backup that shows that, yes, they did indeed under budget for that line item. And so they've requested that we adjust the budget for the current year's grant to reflect the actual costs of fringe benefits. And that results in an increase of their 2023 grant of $17,944. So we do have a staff recommendation that the board approve that as a corrective to a budget error in the initial budget.
You want me to make a motion? Or you go ahead?
Is there a motion to increase Denton County's FY23 improvement grant award for indigent defense coordinator team by $17,944 to a revised total FY23 award of $196,371?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is on page 47, and this is a no-cost extension of grant term for Atascosa County. So TIDC awarded a sustainability grant for regional rural public defense office for Atascosa and 3 surrounding counties being in 2020. That program, the counties decided that they, rather than contracting with TRLA, they would rather implement the program directly by hiring staff attorneys as county employees and operating the program as a county department. So in the course of the transition from TRLA public defender to the county office, some of the cases that TRLA was providing representation for were approaching trial. There was a need for remaining costs to be covered during the transition. So what we're asking for here is that some of the funds that were not used up in their 2022 grant, they be given additional time to allow them the flexibility to fund this kind of residual cost with TRLA without impacting their current county operated program. We have a staff recommendation and motion on page 47 that would do that.
Is there a motion to extend the terms of Atascosa County's FY22 improvement grant for the Regional Public Defender Program through September 30th, 2023, pending receipt of signed request from the Atascosa County Judge?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
And Judge, I'll add that Scott Ehlers and I will be in Atascosa County tomorrow, meeting with judges, county judges, and other officials, checking on the program.
Thank you all. Page 48, we have a request for a grant modification. This is also a no-cost extension of grant term for Capillary Private Defender Service. This is the organization that provides a managed as counsel, operates managed assigned counsel program for Travis County. Also taken into their program option of the Padilla Compliance Office called My Padilla. This is a program that TIDC funded that provides remote Padilla consultation for defense attorneys regarding the immigration-related collateral consequences of guilty pleas and ensuring that adequate representation is provided on that score. We did provide, the board provided a grant directly to the Capillary Private Defender Service early in our OLS work to make sure that private attorneys could access that needed Padilla resources, Padilla advisal resources related to OLS. Initially, because so many of the cases were being handled by public defender offices, particularly TRALA and Neighborhood Defender Service, that had in-house Padilla resources, that was not needed. They did not need additional resources to provide coverage for OLS. As things have progressed and as OLS has expanded, it turns out that that need has arisen. So what this does is essentially extend the term of the grant that the board originally provided to Capillary Private Defender Service to allow them to use their resources to provide coverage for OLS cases that were not originally needed. We have a recommendation and a motion on page 41.
Is there a motion to extend the term of the Capital Area Private Defender Service FY22 improvement grant for Operation Lone Star related to VA advisors through September 30th, 2023, pending receipt of signed requests from the CAPDS authorized official?
So moved.
Second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all. Last grant modification item is on page 49, and this is for Bexar County for the Managed Assigned Counsel Office. So in 2022, TIDC began funding the Managed Assigned Counsel Office in the county. The program experienced delays and staff up to full capacity, and substantial amounts of them that were bid for salaries went unused. TIDC has requested an extension of the grant term and a reallocation of some of those unused funds that were originally budgeted for personnel toward a number of needs that were not included in the original budget. The request here is cost neutral for this grant. There's no additional funds that are being requested. It's just reprogramming funds that were already awarded and also providing an extension of the grant term to allow the county time to use those funds for these other purposes. We've got a chart that begins on page 50. There are a number of particular items that we can touch on here. In the course of working with the county, we thought that many of the items that were requested were kind of straightforward and the staff recommended them. So if you look at the column on the right side of the chart that begins on page 50, in fact, most of the items are recommended by the staff. There were several issues that came up with some of these requests that were either novel, these were things that we hadn't funded for other programs before, or presented some other issue where we thought it would be appropriate to bring it to the board for you all to weigh in on some of these. I should note, there we are. We have Executive Director Emeritus Jim Bethke here with us, who is currently leading the Bexar County Managed Assigned Counsel program, and also Rocky Ramirez, I'm not sure what your title is, Rocky, but key right-hand man, I'm going to go here, who can help speak to some of these. So, Jeff, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered everything. I think just to say that on the staff side, we've been really impressed with the progress of the Bexar County MAC. But like Edwin said, most of this, I think on the staff side, we thought it made sense. There are a couple of things that were novel, so we thought we should put it to the board for your consideration.
Right. So in terms of how to proceed on this, I mean, as I said, you'll see a number of the items staff is recommending and I think are relatively straightforward. So one way we could proceed is to just take up the items where we think there's an issue that the board should particularly weigh in on and take those one by one.
Sounds good.
And Jim and Rocky, if you all can answer questions or want to speak to any of these particular items. The first item in the chart on page 50 relates to LexisNexis research and a subscription for 100 licenses for LexisNexis. So typically, the staff believes it's a straightforward case that the MAC attorneys that are actually employees of the MAC should have that software included in their budget. The county has negotiated a very good contract with LexisNexis to provide a kind of introductory subscription to LexisNexis services for a number of the panel attorneys. I believe that the number was 100 licenses was negotiated. They got a very good deal on it. And their proposal is that because a lot of the attorneys on the panel aren't using that resource, which is really kind of essential to providing good representation, you have to have access to a legal research database in order to do your job. They want to be able to provide an introductory subscription for a number of the attorneys on the panel. You all can speak to this in more detail. And then after that introductory period, those attorneys on the panel would pay in for their share and kind of buy into this contract that was negotiated by the county. Do you all want to kind of elaborate on that, or did I kind of get?
I'd be happy to, Evelyn. First, good morning, everyone. Great to see everyone. Jessica Braddock, Devin, Will, out online. Again, thank you for the support that you've provided. Because the jurisdictions direly need what y'all are doing. We just do need the state to step in and fund more of share the responsibility. But before I say, I do want to thank the staff. I try not to be high maintenance. And I know we've spent many hours on this proposal, and this isn't my first budget adjustment. I think it's probably my second or third. Because again, this program was not established, and as we're going along, we learn what really is needed. Because there's nobody on my team who just wants to come in and check the box and get a paycheck. We really do want to set the standard, and with y'all support, we can. As Edwin noted, it's cost neutral. The very first proposal that I sent, we basically are lapsing about 500,000 in salaries. So my first proposal was at like 480,000. That has gotten cut down to 180,000. And so there are just a few, but the staff has been incredible. And I've also had to work this through our grants and budget folks. And I think what Jeff Edwin said as far as novel, yeah, what we're proposing here is something that is novel. It is something that we did in Lubbock very successfully. Again, on a much smaller scale, but we just had 2 attorneys there, and then we basically got licenses for an additional 30, which was almost half of the team at a greatly reduced price. And the attorneys would, pay the LPDO, so it was cost neutral, but through leveraging buying power. And so this is what we're attempting to do. And the first year is kind of the most challenging because I've met with the auditor's office, and we have to set up their revenue account. We have to have a cash register. We have to have the receipts. And then it's kind of considered program income, even though it's cost neutral. So it's kind of new for the county, but they're being very supportive. And one of the things where I may not have been as clear with the staff is this is not just, it's sure it's a pilot, but this is an introductory. This is what we intend to go forward. And in addition to getting an incredible price, basically $35 a month, which this library would be costing close to $400 to $450 if somebody individually signed up for this level of access. Lexis is also giving us 6 months free, those 100 licenses, which also includes our staff in the 90. And then what we will be doing, we've been sending out notes. We send out at least once a month to all the lawyers on our wheel saying, hey, we're working on this, who's interested? And we've had, I can't say we've had 100, but we've had like over 20 folks that have said we're very interested, because I didn't want to over publicize it and then we're not able to deliver on the service. So we've got like 330 lawyers on our panel, which is not near enough. We're really in a crisis state on the misdemeanor side, but that's kind of a discussion for another day. But part of this is to provide incentives to the local bar and show that we're providing support other than just monitoring their caseloads and say, hey, you got to report this and this. So we want to, provide support. And this is something that we can do by leveraging the buying power. If we don't have this contract, basically the best we were able to get through Westlaw or Lexis is $100 a month. So we have 10 attorneys, that would be $1,000 a month times 12 is $12,000 a year. What this works out to for our team is $3,500 a year. So 65% savings. And we're going to be collecting the money up front because the first 6 months, it's basically $210. And
when this would be basically costing someone, $400 a month. I'm confident we're going to be able to generate this. I know this is much less than the public defender office is paying. So ideally, we're going to pull them in, and I've talked with the county about this. So we're going to get the private attorneys to pay. It's going to be more work on us and our team, but it's something that has been my number one priority since we put together this massive list and we kind of culled it down. And I knew I was in trouble. We had a meeting with Edwin and Doriana, and then at 8:30 the night before, this like a month ago, and we had our list of priorities. I see Burkhardt had accepted a joint, so I thought, they're gonna be jacking with me on something. Check that too, but it still didn't get to where we wanted to go. Because again, this isn't something that's in a cookie cutter, and getting our support on this.
It could be clear. So the private lawyers will reimburse for there?
Yes.
Okay, so what's the actual cost for your 10 lawyers without the,
12,000.
okay,
Yeah.
It's makes financial sense. It's
Yeah.
just a,
okay. It doesn't reflect that here, that's.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not.
I know, you're on the hook for 21.
I'm
Until they pay.
for 21, and we get all of this signed up and get the process in place. So it's a year, it's a year agreement that we want to extend this out. And just knowing the team we put together, it's something that, does have to happen. And one of the things noted in here, dealing with taking into account overhead, which I totally agree with that, but in Bear County, this is something I'm anticipating being changed really soon. Right now, 98% of our cases, A&P misdemeanors, it's $180 flat. That's definitely not where we want to be in that. So there's a multitude of changes that we've made a recommendation to the county criminal courts. We're about to publish a study on it.
I have a question. You said there are over 300 attorneys on your list. How do you decide who gets this?
What we're going to do in this, Lexus would love for us to have 350. But if I go ahead and say, hey, sign up when you want, when I send a note, assuming we get approval on this, I'm going to say, hey, the first 90 that sign up are getting 6 months free. So it's limited. And if we get over that, we're going to be out. Even if we get more, Lexus has already said that they'll come down. But if I go ahead and state, hey, I know I would like, oh, well, maybe I'll do it at some other point. So this is the number that Lexus, they're very interested in doing this because they know that they're going to get some positive publicity as a result, doing something for the public. And the other important thing is, and this is something Jeff had raised, now, can they use it for their private practice? And one of the things we do have it limited to their assigned work. So it's, for a government purpose.
Well, I want to say two things. When you say the county negotiated this deal, that's Jim Betsky.
Yes.
And this brings together two of the things that Jim is really best at, and that is negotiating deals with legal service providers and thinking of new ways to do things. So Jim, before he was before the Indigent Defense Commission existed, negotiated LexisNexis
And Westlaw.
and Westlaw for the entire judiciary in the state of Texas. And he got an amazing deal. So he's already good at that. And the other thing is really, he just doesn't sit on his laurels. He looks at ways to improve what he's doing. And I thank you for being here.
Thank you, Judge.
So I have a question too. I want to know if I'm going to get invited to the dog and pony show that you put on for Lubbock when you get San Antonio done too.
So the reason that we brought this to the board, it's not a lot of money, as you can see, it is a great deal, but because it involves, kind of covering, even as a temporary basis, we thought it was best to get board approval on this. So appreciate your attention, and Jen, thanks for kind of walking us through that. Are there other questions on that item? We can run through many of these pretty quickly. There are just a couple of others that I would flag for you.
I think if you want to, like, take it home, on board, so that way,
We can, I defer to the grants chair and the chair on procedure to do all the recommendations.
Okay.
So we can amend that motion to approve this. So I think we should take one motion, but generally we could ask if there are any concerns or objections as we move forward. So if there are any concerns or objections on this one, just let us know.
You ain't getting it yet, Jim. Just stand by, okay?
Next item is a data analysis and development of procedures. We think this is going to be very helpful, not only for the Bear County program, but for Max in general. And this is going to generate a report and materials. This study and report and development of data related standard operating procedures are going to be very to TIDC as we work with other jurisdictions. So that item is highly recommended by staff. I'm happy to answer. Please stop me because I know we have a.
Sorry, which item was that?
Number 2.
Okay.
That's the third-party gap in data assessment. And I do have a draft proposal if anyone would like to review that, but it looks like it's going to be a very useful program. The third item has to do with a change to the software that the attorneys use to submit vouchers in Bear County. And as part of their work, they need to be able to itemize the work done, particularly in these classifications of cases that the software doesn't allow for itemization in. We think that is very straightforwardly attached to the Max ability to do its job well. And so we recommend that. There is a policy that for software development type work that TIDC can fund 50% of it. That's in our RFA, but we are recommending that. There was a request for consultant fees for training the judiciary and pretrial services on indigency screening. We talked with Jim about this and came down with not recommending this one. The idea was to have Judge Mark Hawker come down and present a training on indigency determinations. And so that's really, I think, the only thing on here that wasn't recommended. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Super briefly on this, we didn't budget anything for if somebody comes in from out of town where we could pick up their travel expenses. And I don't want anyone to think that we're just going to do just kind of like a general training. And Judge Hocker didn't even ask for expense. I just put down the one that I was thinking about. But the county criminal courts, criminal district courts have revised their indigent defense plans. They've adopted the screening tool that's used by Lubbock, and Judge Hacker's the one who's done the statewide training under SB 6. I have great rapport with our pretrial services, the magistrates. So, I was gonna, just be able to say, and Judge Hocker said he would come down, but he didn't even like ask for cost. But if we had that, and really it kind of ties into the next one, dealing kind of with strategic planning. What I'm wanting going forward is just having a small fund where if we do invite somebody in from outside, if they're going to host like a strategic planning or this situation where we've done this complete revision, having some funds for it, because the way that county structures its budget, when you're under a grant, if I don't have a pen written down in my budget, the fight I have to go through to try to get that. So and that's just from my experience over the last year. So this one here, it's not the end of the world. If we're able to do something on this, it'd be great. I think it'll be a value add.
You mentioned number 5, so I'll just, because they involve similar issues. Number 5 was for a consultant to come and help with strategic planning. And that was requested at $8,000. And so because we have traditionally not budgeted for strategic planning consultants for the PD and MAC offices that we help to create, that was a novel issue that we wanted to present to the board. Do we perhaps want to pause on discussion or just continue? Okay, items numbers 6 through 10 in the chart are a number of items for automation, software, and hardware. I know that Rocky is very skilled in using some of these software tools to help automate various workflows in the program. And so there's a kind of suite of things. It's not something that we've typically done before, but I think there's a lot of potential. So we are recommending it, but just going to ask for some reporting on all the good things that you're able to do with some of these software tools and the hardware that goes with them to streamline operations. So that's recommended with just some reporting about the accomplishments. Items 11 through 18. This is high definition video recording equipment, miscellaneous audio and video hardware and software. Things like acoustic panels, mic stands to set up what I guess is referred to as an audio-visual suite and a Zoom room bundle. This isn't something that we've seen before or the board has kind of included in equipment budgets for other programs. And because it was kind of a new kind of request, we wanted to put it before you.
Question about law books. What are the law books that the $5,000 in law books?
It's a great question. We didn't budget for like O'Connor's or the TDCAAs. So some of those are just for, our resource attorneys and also to have a library. There's also like a veterans resource book. There's some mental health books. So the ongoing county would be responsible for the ongoing cost. I think there's a whole list of the books, I think in one of the attachments. So these literally are like tools of the trade. I don't have the new, I go online and get it. But we haven't signed up for the computer assistant. So it's, and I forget some of the other ones, but I checked with our mental health resource attorney, our senior trial resource, our division chief. And I said, okay, what books do we need? And then that list was actually by 6,500. And then the staff has been great. They're like, now we need this. So they really did make us cull these down.
And you say the county are responsible for ongoing costs. Do you need to be a one-time deal, not $5,200 every year?
There's a handful that are a subscription. I think the ongoing is like 1,000. One of the things that we took out that was kind of expensive was the criminal series. Professor Dawson and Dick Swernbell. That since we wind up getting the Lexis, which internally we really aren't going to need that. So some of those are the ones. So the ongoing would be, getting after the legislative session updated. So the ongoing is not 5,000. Much less.
I did not include the full list there,
Sure,
but
that's fine.
okay. So yeah, Judge, you jumped to kind of a section where most everything was recommended. There was one item here where I had asked for some clarification on the banners. I talked to Rocky about that. That's for a sort of graphics for when they're doing law school recruitment activities and things like that. And as kind of printing out a banner, turns out there's only one instead of two, so it's $500 expense. I think that's reasonable for the kind of outreach and events that the program is funding. And then a number of
Where's that?
that's
that's
number 17. That was the only one that we had a question on.
Oh, okay.
And basically that question was acknowledged. But you'll see that the rest of the items in the list are miscellaneous hardware and software items. There's some furniture that they didn't think about in the original budget request for the attorney common meeting space and also the specific meeting rooms, a couple of conference tables, chairs for group gatherings, etc. We thought all that was straightforward, as well as some of these software tools that are kind of necessary for the program to plug into the Bexar County technology ecosystem. But they all seem to be appropriate for the kind of work that they're doing, so they were recommended by the staff. And as you see in the chart, we just wanted to flag some of the items that were newer for you all to speak to.
Did you have anything else to add, Jim?
I just want to really thank the support for, taking all of our questions, all the time that was spent with us to get these to where it's at.
Okay. It's our motion to extend the sum of Bexar County FY22 improvement grant for the Managed Side Council Office to September 30th, 2023, and to reallocate funds for each item listed as recommended on pages 50 and 52, and for item 17.
And for item 17. And then I think the only, before we take that motion, the only question is whether the board had any concerns on the items where we just said, board should consider if you want to approve the whole.
Or 11 through 18.
Yeah, 5, 11, 13, and to some extent, number 1. Yes, and the number was the only one where we said that wasn't recommended.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, does anybody want to talk to you about the ones that are not recommended? Or that we should just consider? I think it starts with 5. Does anybody want to talk about that? Make it by your silence, that's a no. How about 11 through 18? Anybody have any questions on that?
okay,
So the board may want to just approve the entire slate with the exception of number 4 or with number 4.
So number 4 is out right now. So does anybody want to put it back in? I guess that's the question.
okay. Then. Is there a motion to extend the term of Bear County's FY 22 improvement grant for the managed sign council office to September 30th, 2023, and to reallocate funds for each item listed on pages 50, 51, and 52 of the meeting notebook, except for
Item 4.
item 4.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Well, thank you all for your,
Okay.
thank you all for being here, and thanks to the board for your attention and kind of working through some of those new issues. And we want to make sure you had a chance to review. That concludes the request for grant modifications, and I believe what's this on page 70?
Can I just say real quickly, Jeff had to leave, something came up at home and he needed to leave, so he will not be back, and we'll finish up with that.
Everything's there. So page 70 is a report on fiscal monitoring, and we'll go to Deborah Stewart for that report.
Good morning, everyone. Like Evelyn said, starting on page 70 is the fiscal monitoring report. It covers for the whole fiscal year since the beginning of August. So just to highlight the activity since December, we heard a couple reports on the IDR information. Well, a great deal of work went into actually reviewing the IDR. So that was a great deal of the time for this kind of order. But in addition to that, we did get 4 initial reports out. Hidalgo, Cameron, Scurry, and Fisher counties. Hidalgo County has sent in their response to the funding. So that final report will be issued very soon. There are 3 other initial reports in the vetting stage. We can get that through the process. So a couple more they'll actually be getting out. I did work on the Travis County review. Actually waiting on response for one last question on one detail of one of the grants. So as soon as that gets through, that will be finished as well. So wrap up some of these grant things that were started previously. And as we do that, we're starting on 3 new reviews. And on Sunday, I will be traveling with Joel and meeting up with Bill in Smith County this next week. And then I'll be going to Henderson and Upshur counties while we're in that area. And then lastly, I look at CAFRs and single audits that come in from the counties. But I got a financial statement and a single audit report from the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, which is a little unusual because I'm not a county, but so many of our counties use that. But I just reviewed it real quickly. There were no compliance issues that the outside auditors used, but I'm kind of actually excited to have the report so I can review it a little further because so many of our counties use them. I mean, that's the end of my report.
Thanks, Deborah. That concludes the grant section of the agenda. Again, thank you all for your attention and working through all that with.
Thanks for all your work on this.
On everything, every single time, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next is Scott.
So, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So The improvement team, this past quarter, a lot of work going on around doing planning studies for counties interested in regional public defender offices and managed assigned counsel programs. A lot of work up at the legislature. Did a lot of stuff around the 60th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright a couple of weeks ago, and as well as the Future Indigent Defense Leaders program. On planning studies, we've done a 13-county High Plains Regional Public Defender Office planning study up in the Panhandle, a 5-county office around Hunt County, a MAC planning study for Grayson County, and we still have a few in the pipeline we're trying to get done before May 8th when the grant applications are due. At the legislature, as I mentioned, or that Jeff previously mentioned, testimony on our omnibus bill, as well as a bill related to writs of habeas corpus. On Gideon versus Wainwright, the 60th anniversary, there was a resolution passed by both the House and the Senate. Our board member, Representative Reggie Smith, sponsored the one in the House. Senator Royce West passed and sponsored the resolution in the Senate with support from Senator Whitmire and Senator Hinojosa as well. Staff was recognized during those resolutions. We had a symposium that was, we were joined by the Texas Tribune, so it was live broadcast around the world about issues around public defense in Texas. And that was also the week of the 60th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright. We have, this is the agenda that was developed by, with the help of the Texas Tribune. If you'd like to see that, it's also online right now at Texas Tribune. It'll be there forever if you didn't get a chance to check it out live. I guess the other thing I wanted to mention on Gideon, Kristen did a great job of putting together a panel discussion, a virtual panel discussion for law students around the state, trying to get them interested in indigent defense and becoming public defenders or assigned counsel. Did you want to mention anything about that?
The presentation itself was an hour and a half long presentation that was scheduled around the law schools in Texas, their lunch hour for the students to attend. We sent invites out to all the Texas law schools. We had around 40 to 50 students and faculty that joined us for that call. There's a bunch of public defenders speak about their work, what their day-to-day life is like, as well as kind of why to get into the work. And so it was a good event for everybody.
Beyond that, Bill, did you want to quickly go over what's going on with the Future Indigent Defense Leaders?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. The Future Indigent Defense Leaders is our partnership with the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association and Harris County Public Defender's Office to train our next generation of Texan defenders. Our second class going through the national program had a returner weekend, Phil 2.0, in January in Atlanta. And then the first of our classes being held here in Texas will have their returner weekend coming up on April 20th in Austin. And our second Texas class will have their core program from April 22nd through May 6th here in Austin. And we're looking forward to seeing our second Texas class get going and have our returners back again to build on their skills.
Great, thanks, Bill. I think that's it for the improvement team report.
Okay, Lenny, please.
Okay, we have 2 items. Policy monitoring. Go ahead.
Please turn to page 77 for a summary of recent policy monitoring activity. Since the December board meeting, we've received responses from counties, from 2 counties for responding to our report findings. We've issued 5 reports for which we're still waiting a response, and there are 7 counties for which we're very close to issuing reports. We have two upcoming reviews. One is in Smith County. We're going with this fiscal monitor, Deborah Stewart, and one is in Hayes County. That will be later in the month of April. Going to page 79, we now collect monthly data from Maverick and Zavala counties. We've had a long history of monitoring with these two counties, and we've had an issue where there are many council requests, but we've had trouble getting any information on rulings on those requests. So last August, the Policies and Standards Committee approved for TIDC staff to ask for monthly data. We had at first some trouble getting courts to respond to our requests, but this board had recommended in December that we talk to Judge Sid Harrell of the 4th Region. He contacted the county officials and actually talked to them, and since then, both the district courts have been reporting data to us. We have had a little trouble in that last November, the two county judges lost their election, and so we have new people. They're not attorneys, and they're just now having their first misdemeanor dockets, and they kind of struggle to figure out what we're trying to ask for, but they've been very cooperative with us, and I think at our next meeting, we'll have all courts reporting data to us, and hopefully we can go forward after that. Continuing on in the meeting notebook, on page 81, we have a map of recent policy monitoring activity. And then I'd like to conclude with page 82. We're about to have a meeting with the fiscal monitor for our annual risk assessment. For this risk assessment, we look at the factors listed, but this meeting is to determine which counties we will make new reviews for. And we will have, after this meeting, a tentative schedule for the calendar year. And that concludes my report, and I would like to turn this over to Kristen, who will talk about complaints.
So centralized complaint summary, the firm received 15 new complaints, 2 remain open, pending final investigation, 12 complaints were reported to local officials, 9 complaints went through Senate staff referral letters, and 12 were handwritten letters. The most common complaints continue to be attorneys trying to communicate with clients that have frequent and cases. And just as an example of that, one complaint made here, the complainant on the state and then had been in jail since October, and his court-appointed attorney had not visited him. So the resolution was to forward that complaint to the local authority, and then also send that defendant a referral letter for the other complaints that were part of his letter that were outside of our scope.
So policy and
Thank you, Ms. Ryder. Any questions? When is our next meeting going to be? Do we know?
June.
Sometime June. Is there any new business? Any public comment? I should have mentioned earlier, as a matter of general interest, the court went to Baylor Law School last week for oral argument, and I found out that they have a criminal practice special distinction program, and they're doing a lot. I was not aware of it, and I think that it's important to be aware of what's going on. And I have a magazine about it, but they are doing lots to encourage people to go into criminal law. And at this point, they have a criminal law boot camp, and they have more people wanting to do it than they have room for. So they really are pushing this idea of getting people in. And the dean said that once people get a little experience in criminal law, that's what they want to do, because it's just so interesting. Anyway, I wanted to make sure y'all were aware of that. Unless there are any further questions, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Bye.
Thank you.
This is ready.
Bye.
Where you